Hello.
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 Very good hellos.
Very good hellos. It's been a little while and we're very, very pleased to be back on the Books at Lunchtime wagon. And we thought when we were getting together our autumn schedule of literary loveliness, we thought we have to talk to William. So hello, William Shaw.
I'm glad to be a fixture. It feels very nice to be back there in electronically, if not physically.
Well, quite. How have you been?
I've been very well, but very busy. Very busy. It's, you know, I keep the fact is lockdown stopped. I seem to be doing book events again, meeting real people that you can't mute. And it's thrilling, actually. It's great to be back out there. And also a million other things seem to be going on at the moment, but it's, you know, it's all good, but busy.
Excellent. Well, this sounds like you're keeping you out of trouble. So that's what we like to hear.
Your name is always being used in the bookshop. We're always recommending your books, and customers are asking about them because I learned something that I did an analysis of our of what sells in the shop, just because, you know, data and all that. And so I was just creating some pie charts to amuse myself, probably task aversion. And I found out that, you know, crime had this much of the pie chart. And then when I looked a bit more closely, I did the top 100 titles of the previous year. I realized that between you and Elly Griffiths, you had your own wedge of a pie chart for the whole.
Wow, that's fantastic to hear. That is fantastic to hear. That's really brilliant.
Genre.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I was just hanging out with Elly quite a lot, actually, just over this last few days, because she's had a new book out, so we've been doing lots of events together. It's been wonderful. In fact, we did a midnight launch for her book, The Midnight Hour.
Did you?
Yeah, it was great.
Because that's one of the but we're not here to talk about her.
Oh, okay.
To talk about maybe she'll come back and talk about The Midnight Hour, because that is, you know, an event, isn't it? But we're still talking about this one.
Ah, the Trawlerman. Yes, that's right. That's my latest. Yes,
that's your latest, and we've got all but the prequel here. So this is the fourth in the series, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
And so it's still in hardback for Christmas.
Still in hardback, so it makes a very, very good present.
It does, and the fact it's still in hardback means that it's a good book, doesn't it? Because if it had been rubbish, they would have put it straight to paperback.
That's one way of putting it. Very, very tactful, and yeah, no, it's nice. You know, hardbacks are great, isn't it? They still exist, and they're still valued.
It's a nice gift, actually. So, do you want to tell us about the book?
Well, the Trawlerman is you know, there's a couple of things to say about it. Really, it's like the fourth in the series. Now, I put my poor detective Alex Cupidi through quite a lot in the first three books, and it was beginning to tell, because obviously these days, you know, we're not writing the Thursday Murder Club. We're in a kind of more realist world. If that sounds really bad, I don't mean to diss Richard Osman, but you know, a lot of crime fiction is about kind of realism. So if you put people through bad stuff, it has to have an effect on them. So by the fourth book in the series, my detective is off work. She's got PTSD, and she's got this most peculiar sort of thing, which I did a lot of research into PTSD. It's really interesting, the sort of mindset you get where you're kind of short-circuiting your own brain and you're in constant panic. Some people are, and this constant sort of high alert that something really bad is going to happen because bad things have happened to you in the past. And I thought, well, if you're a police officer, you're kind of in a really weird position, because it's your job to spot really bad things, and yet you're thinking they're constantly going to happen, and how would this affect her if she has a slightly distorted sense of reality on it? And I know that's not a very good sell straight away, but I went to Dungeness, and I did a writing session there with some other writers, and I was talking about writing in Dungeness. So I got them all to write a piece while they're actually sitting down in this garden in Dungeness. And I thought I'd better do one myself. And I actually wrote the first chapter sitting in that garden, because a train came in at the time. And I was just thinking, oh, that looks like a celebration going on the train. What can they be celebrating? So I turned it into a wedding. And I put Alex Cupidi in this. And Alex Cupidi, everybody's really happy at this wedding. And Alex Cupidi can't be happy, because she's really sort of suffering from the stress of PTSD. And she's convinced that something's going to go wrong. And then something really awful does happen at this wedding. So that was kind of like, it kind of fell into place there. And it also comes out from the fact that when I was, years ago, I did a bit of journalism in Brighton, and I was writing about the seafront, and I met this woman who runs one of the Arches in Brighton seafront. She runs a fishmonger from there, and I was talking to her, and she was a lovely woman, and she was describing the old fishmonger community that used to be around what is now Churchill Square, where there used to be lots of older tiny little houses. And she said, my first husband was lost at sea as a fisherman. And I thought, oh yeah, that's interesting. And she said, but actually I was already in love with somebody else when he got lost. But the terrible thing was that I couldn't marry this other man because I was still married to this man who'd disappeared at sea, and I had to wait 7 years until they could declare him dead, because that's the law. If you don't have a body, you're not declared dead till 7 years after you disappeared. And so that was in the back of my brain, and I kind of thought, oh, what if I can attach that to this first chapter I've written? And that's kind of what the book is. It's about somebody who's disappeared at sea 7 years before, and all the suspicions you have when somebody just disappears and their body's never found.
And so the story unfolds.
And so the story unfolds.
I was really interested as well. I think I said to you on your last visit here, because at the end of Deadland, I thought that was it. I thought we were done with Alexandra Cupidi, because this one finishes with sorry, I don't know if you can hear that. It finishes with she closed her eyes and dug her nails into her palms and wondered how long she could keep doing this. And so you really set it up for her to have PTSD.
Well, I kind of finished the book like that. I think one of the really interesting things I've learned is that actually, you know, as a writer, I think of fiction, your chapter beginnings and ends become really, really important. And it's a really lovely form. You're almost like writing a short story, but it's not quite, because you've got to start on tension, you've got to end on a different tension. But actually then you can extend that to the whole book in a series. Is what's the big unresolved thing at the end of a series? What's going to make people just think, oh, but I've got to read the next one, because that's what we want you to do. So it was kind of, you know, it's kind of important to finish on a question, I think, in a book. One, because the crime demands that you resolve things, and the old-fashioned crime resolves everything. But I think modern crime has a kind of, much like life, not everything is fixed.
But you do have really good continuity. The characters do actually, their stories naturally pick up where they had to leave off, because Bill South is in this one again, isn't he?
Yeah, he is. And it goes back to a book I wrote called The Birdwatcher, really, because the main character, Alex Cupidi, is somebody who kind of believes in the law, and that the police are there for wherever their faults, that if they can, the most important thing for the police is to actually follow the law. And I think that's what you have to do if you're a police officer. But the more you become involved in a community and in the loyalties, things become complicated. So in the first Birdwatcher, she does something to Bill South that a lot of readers didn't really like, because she obeys the law and she does something to him, but he remains her friend through this thing that she did to him. She gets a chance to sort of resolve that, but it kind of goes back to PTSD and realizing how much. I spoke to a police officer friend of mine who's also a writer, and she was in a serious crime unit for many years, and she had PTSD, and she said counseling and the therapy she had were just fantastic. It was the absolute opposite to your sort of Sopranos scenario, where you're always resistant to, you know, you always have not the Sopranos, but, you know, it's always a classic thing, isn't it? Your grizzled cop has to go therapy, and they think the therapy is nonsense because they're all liberal and wishy-washy. I thought, what if the therapy is really brilliant and actually completely changed his life? Because my friend who's been an officer said it was just amazing, and it helped her so much and really transformed not just her to get over this incident, but it actually led her to think about her whole life differently. And I thought, well, maybe my main character is going to change a bit, because she's been through a process that begins to reveal herself to herself, which sounds very deep for a crime novel, but it kind of, she changes a little bit.
Yeah, but you know, having seen my pie chart and realized that there might be a bit of hand selling behind that.
Bless you.
I've been reading more widely in the genre to find out what books I can recommend to people when they have read all of your books and your colleagues' books. And not all of it actually has the substance that these do. So I wouldn't say that they're just a crime novel. I mean, what I always say to customers about these is there are the personalities, there are the personal stories that you can follow and you can relate to and get to know the characters and enjoy their stories. But actually, you wrestle with the really big problems that the rest of us don't know how to deal with. It, and like in Salt Lane, wasn't it Salt Lane that was about the migrant population and what our responsibility is to them?
Yeah, it was. And I really liked that as a former journalist, having something big and meaty to get your teeth into something, that I learned something as I'm writing the book. And, you know, when I was writing Salt Lane, I spoke to immigration officers and things like that. And they're, you know, what you want to do, what your first instinct is to cast them as these people as really bad people who are stopping the freedom of movement and things like that. And then you talk to them a bit more and you realize that they've got feelings about what they do. And also they see the cynical side of migration. They see the people smugglers and they see all the other stuff, and that they have a certain cynicism towards bleeding heart liberals like me. Well, that's great stuff for a novel, because novels don't want to, they're not, you know, you don't want to make, especially a crime novel, you don't want to make it polemical, but you do want to have those issues there. And I was really struck in you know, this whole thing about Salt Lane is I started from water because I wanted to write a book about the drainage of the local area, funnily enough, because it's a whole man-made area. I thought man-made landscapes. And out of that, I got the immigration story, actually, because they're trying for 1,000 years, we've tried to keep water out of that bit, and water still comes in. And that just made me really think of exactly what Kent is doing anyway. That's the same thing. You know, you try and keep stuff out and it comes in. And sometimes when it comes in, it's quite useful. You know, it's not an open and shut case. But, you know, it was really interesting speaking to those people, because I wouldn't normally speak to them. I tend to sort of create two-dimensional versions of them in my head, but when you meet them and you reach out to them, you kind of find they've got a far more nuanced version of the world. That's what novels can do, isn't it? They can, you know, they can help you think things through. Certainly they do as a writer. And it's not a big point. I don't come out of that saying immigration is good or bad or everybody's bad, but that's the world we live in, and we have to recognize that we live in a world where a lot of people are going to suffer. If you have laws against immigration, a lot of people are going to suffer. It's not a net good.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, that you're not telling anyone what their opinion should be. There's no judgment there, but you're just exposing a lot of the issues to provoke further thought. And other issues are like housing development. So now I would very much like the field opposite my house not to have been put down for development, but where are the people going to live? So, but you got one more issue in on that one, didn't you? What was the other issue in Deadland? Stripey.
Hold on, in Deadland or Gravesend? Hold on, Gravesend.
Gravesend? Was it Gravesend?
Gravesend was badgers, because you know, when I started the series with the book called The Birdwatcher, what I wanted to do is write about natural history a little bit, because nature writing is the most amazing thing that's been going on in this country, but it hasn't really infected other genres in the sort of way. I'm not a naturalist, but I thought it'd be really fun to try and see if you could do nature writing and crime writing. And so every now and again I get a bit involved in natural history there, and the moment you talk about development on greenfield sites, you've got to deal with badgers, and they're, you know, that was fun finding out about badgers, because they're an extraordinary species, and it's really, you know, we know so little about badgers actually, you know, and I spoke to some of the top badger people when doing that, but they live underground and they come out after dark and they communicate by sense of smell, so we don't understand all sorts of bits of their behavior yet, and that's quite good for crime fiction, because it's about those dark things that are a bit hidden. And so it works metaphorically quite well. The other thing I found about badgers is, which is very pertinent to our now times, is they will kind of kill to preserve their home. And that seems to be a sentiment, you know, we're very obsessed about protecting our territory at the moment. And so badgers are a really good sort of emblematic thing about that. And home's really important, you know, like house building and all that stuff is really important, isn't it? We want a place. And everybody wants to have a place, and it's getting harder to find it. Well, I'm profound. It's not even the afternoon yet. We've gone into major profundity.
And this is what I say. It's not just crime. Your books aren't just crime novels. There's not sort of a crime and whodunit. Sorry,
you're a bit frozen.
So, yeah, you're frozen. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully not, but it's as much entertainment for me finding out about that stuff. And one of my favorite books of all time was Waterland by Graham Swift, a sort of 1980s book, which was a crime book actually, but it was about natural history of that. And I just love the fact that, you know, it really opened my eyes, so you can actually almost have contemporary sort of knowledge poured into a story in that kind of way and learn stuff about it. The natural history of the eel. in there, which now we've discovered is all wrong, actually. The latest natural history says, but at the time we kind of thought all these things about where they bred. Sorry, I've witted on that, but if you haven't read Waterland by Graham Swift, it's just a brilliant book.
We'll write it down. So I need to ask you about something that you've got involved in, because just doing all this writing and research isn't quite enough, is it? And promoting your fellow authors, that's not enough. Because I got to have a conversation with you in between the books at lunchtimes. What's been keeping you busy?
Yeah, I threw myself at Tracy's mercy because I have this idea for doing a volunteer run pop-up bookshop. And so I thought I better speak to somebody who really knows about volunteer run bookshops. And what happened is the first lockdown, I saw shops closing around me and I thought, what is going to happen to these spaces? And I've always thought the bookshops have led the way. The new wave of bookshops have led the way about saying what bookshops have to become. They are social places. They're not just about selling stuff. And all shops need to learn that. That you can't sell shirts anymore. You can't just sell stuff. You've got to do something that has a social purpose, because shops are going to be transforming into something new. And Kett's books, I think, is an absolute, sort of vanguard of what that kind of thing is going to become. Lots of independent bookshops have actually changed their model over time to do this. So I wanted to open my own bookshop just to sort of say in Brighton we can do something along those lines. And I'm working with a charity called Creative Future, who work with underrepresented artists and do a lot of literature stuff. Underrepresented people who might not struggle to get into the mainstream because of their background or because of mental health issues or health issues. And so I got about 14 Brighton writers, 13 including me, and said, can we do this? Can we take over a shop? And we'll sell our books as long as you mentor some of these other people put forward from Creative Future. Got the council to give us a lease for 6 months. And so stocked the books by these writers, including me, and also other local Brighton writers. We have some Brighton writers who like Jeff Noon, people like that, and people you've never heard of like Peter James, who just obviously really, really need the help. And then we put books about writing because we want it to be a writing space. So we got the sort of, Stephen King on writing Bird by Bird and all those sort of classics that people often sort of use to keep their morale up when they're writing, and some of the more technical ones. And books also by various communities around Britain that we just like to see a bit more represented. And so it was kind of a weird selection process for our books. And we work with a local bookshop called Goldsborough Books, who luckily supply all these books for us, because what I quickly intuited from speaking to Kett's books was the hardest work of all is actually keeping your stock running and sending books back and doing things like that. So we let some other bookshop do that. But that also means that we're selling books on their behalf. We're not putting another shop out of business. We're hopefully contributing to the local ecology rather than sort of competing on different ground. And so it's been really, really busy. And we're doing events in there pretty much most nights that we're open at the moment. And we do a lot of workshops. We do a lot of writing sessions. We have events with both local writers and writers that we'd just like to represent a bit more. We've got something coming up with Nadine Matheson, who's a Black British crime writer, whose debut came out this year. She's being interviewed by Julia Crouch. What else have we got? We've got Peter James, actually. Poor Peter James, who needs desperately to sell some more books. We've got him on the 13th to come and do some signings, which is really kind of him, actually, and really useful for us because we keep our costs. We cover our costs by selling books. Goldsborough Books return some of the money to us of what we sell, which allows us to pay for electricity, and our heating's just broken. So that's going to be an interesting one. A long and fulsome answer there, but it's, I do, I've got huge respect for, the more I'm in this business, the more respect I have for local bookshops, because it's not just about selling books. They're really transformational to places. Just another anecdote, one of my local bookshop friends here is Stenning Books. Who's an independent bookshop just over the Downs from Brighton, and I've been doing events with them. And whenever I say to this about how transformational they are, they always go, "Oh well, we're just doing this and that." And I sort of say, "Well, you're doing." They've done so many events and transformed this village where there wasn't a bookshop before that, and I've forgotten that Julia Donaldson used to come and sign for them. Well, Julia Donaldson has now moved to the village because she liked the bookshop so much. Then the post office went bankrupt. Julia Donaldson bought the post office and is doing like Stenning Books, turning it into a social business. And I was saying that's because you're there as a bookshop. You've created this different mentality about what shops are for in this place, and it's transforming the village. And I think it makes a huge difference. There you go.
Those are very kind words, William. And I think the project that you've been working on is just, it's just fascinating. And I just love what you say about, you know, shops needing a social purpose as well as an economic purpose, you know, one that drives the bottom line. So I think it finishes at Christmas. Was your 6 months up around Christmas or shortly? Isn't it?
It is. We're actually closing on the 18th of December, so we can get the books back and actually have a breather, because it's been so full on, as Tracy warned us it would be. And it's also about, you know, because we're doing it as a volunteer project, we've got and it's going to close, we've got the opportunities to have conversations. Now, very often for shops, that's a bit of a, you know, it's part of your job, but it's almost getting in the way. For us, that's actually part of the thing. Is so many people come in and they say, you know, and you say, are you a writer? And they go, oh, and actually, yes, they are. And they've been longing to find a way to fit into that kind of thing. And we can do that in a way that's a lot harder for other shops. And obviously, we get 3 or 4 people a day bringing in their self-published books. And you sort of say to them a lot of the time, brilliant, you've self-published your books. But don't you wish you'd joined a community of writers before you did it? So you could learn how hard it's going to be and how hard it is to sell books, how hard it is. I mean, like, you know, it's so thrilling when Tracy says something like that about the pie chart, because what you're trying to do is actually become part of a reading culture. And it's not something you just come along by saying, here's a book. It's a long process. The best way to kind of stop people wasting their time and money just publishing a single book, which they then keep under the bed for the next 5 years, is to join other communities of writers and actually just find out about it and find out about publishing and all things like that. So it's lovely to see that, you know, and actually if I was to do it again, I'd make it even more of that, because joining writers up is quite pleasurable and they can really help empower each other.
You see, the danger of these sorts of conversations, William, is that it makes one think what else one could be doing.
You lot are doing enough. You lot are definitely doing enough. Yeah, I mean, I think that's it's a terrible thing, because that's part of the problem. Is like, actually, I've got to stop and write a book at some point. It's driving me nuts, you know. But it's lovely. It's lovely to prove the case, actually, isn't it? Because I think what you're doing, and I came down and saw you. I guess it was 2 years ago now, when you were doing your sort of day where you got all the local shops together and stuff like that. And I thought that was just wonderful, and that was like part of the switching on a light bulb that led to this sort of creation of process. And I think, you know, you have these things in towns like ours called business improvement districts, and they're not really thinking along those lines yet. You know, they're just thinking about, they're really hoping for it all to come back how it was, and it's not going to come back how it was. You know, those rates that people are charging for high street shops are not going to carry on. If that's the only way they're thinking, they're looking into an abyss. There's got, you know, even for commercial self-interest, it's quite good to think socially.
Let this be, sound the klaxon. William Shaw has spoken. This is a call to arms if ever I heard it. Well, yeah, I mean, we share much of the same philosophy, really. And it's, you know, partly why it's so wonderful to have these conversations, because we end up freewheeling into stuff that's, you know, tangentially related.
But isn't it brilliant that books can do this? I think books have really, I mean, the more I'm around books, I think they're completely different from when I was a kid, when you read a book on your own and that was it. And you might discuss it in school or something. But books have become these social things that communities sort of form around and book groups form around, and they've got a real different value, I think, partly in response to the internet, which kind of undervalued all that stuff. People have and, you know, email obviously makes it easier for people to connect, but people connect around books and reading in a really different way, and therefore bookshops can have this sort of different role. I mean, it's great speaking to, you know, it's much fun speaking to people who have bought a bookshop off somebody else from the previous generation of booksellers, when you just wore tweed, smoked a pipe and didn't like anybody coming in your shop. I mean, there really was that kind of, you know, when people said, oh, bookshops all went out of business because because Amazon came along. Well, some of them went out of business because they didn't really like readers at all. They only wanted them to read, you know, a few books of their own select choosing, you know, and it's great. I mean, I think booksellers are very different these days. I'm wittering on now, aren't I?
We just like chatting with you, William. I think, you know, this is it's wonderful that Zoom is facilitating this conversation, and this thing that we're doing, obviously, which was born out of lockdown and the fact we couldn't get to our community. But yes, we will have to catch up over an actual cup of coffee sometime. I mean, I know we all have our coffee, but it's not quite the same when we're all in different rooms. Tell us what you're reading. What have you been reading to get you through lockdown? during that copious amount of free time you obviously have had?
One of the books I really enjoyed most was The Plot by Jean Hanff Korelitz, which was a big twisty book, and I'm not a big fan of twisty books actually, but this book is got a sort of uber twist in it, and it's about a failing literary writer in America who kind of steals somebody else's plot and becomes hugely successful from it, and then bad things start to happen and it starts to unravel. But I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really nicely put together. It was a breath of fresh air. What else have I been reading? Well, I've just read The Midnight Hour, which Elly Griffiths we're just talking about, which is one of her Brighton mysteries, and it was lovely because if you ever meet Elly Griffiths, she's got the most extraordinary background, and her granddad was a variety magician, and so it's kind of based on his world. And once when I was touring with her, we stopped at Crewe Alexandra Station, and she said, this is a really important place to me because my granddad used to come here. In the variety days they used to work, you'd have a run in a theatre from Monday to Sunday, and on Monday to Saturday, and on Sunday you'd all travel to the next place. But because they didn't see each other during the seasons, they would stop for an hour or two at those big railway interchanges, and Crewe Alexandra was the big place. So all the variety artists on a Sunday would there be hanging out, having a cup of tea on Crewe Alexandra Station. And I was standing on the station there, and Elly began saying, and that's the beginning of her next book. So it was a real not us standing on the station, her grandfather and that kind of generation standing on the station platform. So that was a real pleasure to read. What else? I'm just diving into Will Dean's Green Apples, so that return to his Tuva series, which is just Bad Apples, sorry. And which is always a pleasure to read. He's such a smart writer.
You said this is the part of the Tuva series. It is. There's something interesting and worth mentioning about Tuva, isn't there?
Yeah, he's writing a detective who's deaf, and he's not deaf himself. And it's a really interesting sort of example of sort of restrict your characters and give them a different world, and it really sort of sings. But you can only do that if you've got quite a good wit, and I think he's got that wit. It's a dangerous territory to wade into and get wrong, and I think he's done lovely things with that. And he also wrote a standalone that came out earlier in the year, which was one of the darkest books I've read actually, and I can't remember its name now, but it's worth looking out for. It's really unrelentingly tough, but really clever as well. What else did I mention earlier? There was another book I've been reading. I love it when my brain goes completely blank.
You mentioned Fragile.
Oh, Fragile by Sarah Hilary, which was a complete surprise. I love it when people just do something completely. It's really hard when you're in crime to do something that's in a completely different genre. But out of nowhere, Sarah Hilary has written a sort of modern Gothic horror. It's sort of like Victorian Gothic set in contemporary times, and it's just nothing like she's ever written before, and it's really, really beautifully written. And it's just, it's dark and magical. You don't quite understand what's going on, most of it, in a good way. Very dreamlike.
It's a really interesting cross section of things, and the pie chart people will be very happy to have those.
Well, I'm writing something completely different for my next one. I'm writing a thriller. Well, I've written it actually. It's coming out in May, but I'm writing a kind of. I as a kid I used to read Neville Shute books, and it suddenly struck me that there was no old-fashioned adventure fiction going on in British publishing, because we're just obsessed with the sort of darkness. And actually, that mixture of kind of slightly romantic fiction and hero quest had kind of disappeared. And then I heard a story from the boat show where they said they were warning billionaires about putting all the latest technological equipment on their yachts, which is of course what billionaires love to do. They said, you're going to get hacked if you keep putting all these electronics on your boat and automating everything, because those super yachts can basically sail themselves these days. So I thought, oh, super yacht getting hacked, there's a nice idea. So I've written this kind of daring do adventure thing in which the hero is the person who is actually the person who understands how to sail a boat barehanded. So I've got a sort of Ellen MacArthur figure, if people remember Ellen MacArthur, who was around the world sailor, and so she's kind of a lowly member of the crew, but actually she's the one who proves her worth, because when all the electronics go dead, you need somebody who understands the sea.
This sounds very exciting, William. So this is a complete, is this a standalone or is
it is a standalone. It's a standalone, and you hear it first. Actually, it's coming out under the name G.W. Shaw, because they wanted to sort of keep it separate from there, which is actually my proper name, because my first name's actually George. I'm actually George William, but so it'll be a G.W. Shaw. I'll be back to William Shaw for them.
Coming quick and fast this morning.
Keep an eye out for that one for May. Will Alex be back?
She is back in actually 2024.
No,
I
that's
know.
years away.
I know it is. I was trying to say, can I write 2 and slip, put the other one in, but they really liked the thriller and they wanted another one. So I'm deep into the other thriller right now, and begun the next Alex as well. But I've still got a 1960s series to catch up on. So I mean, it's
Are you going back to that one as well?
I'd love to. I would love to, but yeah, haven't managed to do that yet.
Well, it sounds like you've got an awful lot to do, and we've kept you for quite a long time at lunchtime. So I think we better get you back to real quill and parchment.
Well, I better had really, but it's been a real pleasure. And like you said, can we have a coffee sometime in real life? That'd be very nice.
Brilliant.
That'd be brilliant. Yeah, thank you.
Let's do it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's always lovely to see you. So apologies for the shop noise, but it's
that
good
means
that
you've got
customers
people
are
in
coming
there.
in. Yeah. Right. Okay. See you again. I'll